Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, the debate over the death penalty has resurfaced in Nigeria following the sentencing of a woman to hang after she was convicted of killing her husband in 2017. Many Nigerians have been holding heated discussions about capital punishment after it emerged that Maryam Sanda killed her husband and was subsequently sentenced to death by hanging. She has appealed against the sentence, supported by a coalition of civil rights groups that oppose the death penalty. More than 2,000 people are on death row in Nigeria, but executions rarely take place, according to Amnesty International. We'll discuss the Maryam Sanda case and the merits and demerits of capital punishment in a moment. But first, here's Maryam Sanda and her relatives reacting in courts to her sentence of death by hanging.
Accordingly, I hereby sentence Maryam Sanda to death by hanging until she dies. This I have done, believing that
but you know she can't compose herself when you vote. I don't know why you...
Grief-stricken Maryam Sanda and her relatives there after that sentence of death was pronounced. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the human rights lawyer and activist, Barrister Frank Tietie, and by the lawyer and security analyst, Barrister Mike Ejiofor. Thank you very much indeed to both of you. It's very rare that we get two lawyers in at the same time, but hopefully this will make for an interesting chat. But first of all, to you, Barrister Frank Tietie, just remind us of this case of Maryam Sanda and what led to her being sentenced to death by hanging.
Well, I still want us to deal with the facts in the realm of allegations. She was alleged to have...
well, she's been found guilty by a court.
Well,
that takes it out of the realm of allegation.
No, the point is that the court made those pronouncements on the facts that were placed before it. And
yeah, but until that is overturned,
and in course of our discussion, you find that you find that when a court reaches such a decision of seriousness based on circumstantial evidence, that's why you wonder why it should adopt that, and that's why I would personally still maintain that it's still in the realm of allegation.
So tell us,
there were no direct pieces of evidence, and
okay.
There were no persons who were there who saw her stabbed the man. And all of when they put the kind of analysis that I still feel that we're in the realm of shortage together, and then they come to the conclusion that, in assumption that she killed the man, I think I want to still maintain that the allegations. And then, if you ask me what led to it, she was alleged to have killed her husband, stabbed the husband multiple times in the chest, and as a result of a domestic quarrel.
But I imagine it would be fairly easy to determine whether something is a stab wound or not.
Well, you know, the standard of proof in criminal law with regards to, in this case, this very serious offense of culpable homicide, is a proof beyond reasonable doubt. And even the court, in this case, acknowledged that that hasn't been established. And so you don't consider taking another person's life without the certainty that the person actually committed the crime. And there are lots more elements that were not even considered when it comes to criminal defense. And so Maryam Sanda's case is another episode of poor prosecution and also poor criminal defense. And I don't think that properly, if this case is pursued to the appeal, it will ever stand. This conviction will ever stand.
Well, let me bring in Barrister Mike Ejiofor. Presumably, as he said, she has the right of appeal. I think she has already appealed. Is it likely that her sentence, based on what you know of this case, might be overturned on appeal, looking at the merits and demerits of the case against her?
Well, I wouldn't want to look at the demerits or the merits of the case, because one, the court of first instance had made a pronouncement, and she has a right of appeal. Until that is determined, my worry is this issue of death sentence. the world is moving away from death sentence, and we're not doing anything to get out of that. So that's my worry. I don't want to begin to discuss the technicalities.
Yeah, but nevertheless, you were quite clear that you support the death penalty in certain instances.
Of course I do. In certain cases, I tell you, cases like this of Sanda, which are just classified under domestic violence, even though it's a homicide, such cases shouldn't attract death penalty as far as I'm concerned.
Even if it's a premeditated case of...
Of course. Yes, that's my position. And I'll give you a reason. This couple have a child, a product of a child, and the man has been killed, and again, you sentence the wife to death. You're going to turn out more criminals from the product of that family. So there must be a way of reforming such deviance, because one, she could have acted out of provocation, ignorance, or depression, whatever it is. But my worry is that in Nigeria, cases where we are supposed to have a death penalty, we are not having it. For instance, corruption. I'm of the view that Nigeria should legislate that corrupt practices should be visited with death penalty, even though the world says, you see, my position is that I don't support death penalty, but to serve as deterrent to grievous crime against the society, I think we should go that way.
So, in other words, your opposition to the death penalty is limited to certain areas.
Exactly.
Let me bring Barrister Tietie in, because this, as he said, well, not so much said, but as he suggested, it's brought to the fore the discussion about the death penalty in Nigeria. It's reignited the whole question about judicial executions. I mean, how much has Maryam's case brought it to the public attention again?
Well, quite a lot. It's not as if it would change anything. We've not had the courage to carry out executions because Nigeria actually currently practices a moratorium on the death penalty. And the reason is because we based on commitments to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations that we'll work towards the elimination of the death penalty in Nigeria, and we're working towards that as a country.
But wasn't there some executions some time ago? I think it was Edo State or somewhere.
Well, I'm not aware, but let me tell you something.
Right.
The thing is this: death penalty, especially by firing squad, execution by firing squad, became popular in Nigeria during the military. It's a military thing. It's one of those military hangovers. And the idea is this: Akinola Aguda, the famous jurist, was of the position that far back in the 80s, he's been the proponent of those being against the death penalty as a jurist. Said, you cheapen life when you just line people up and then you shoot them out. You just shoot them. And then you just take their life, after a very brief trial, like we've had in the case of Maryam Sanda, a trial that was not very, I would say that lacked depth. It was horrid. All the normal elements of criminal defense were not even put up. And then we need to gravitate towards that civilized country, where take a look at Oscar Pistorius, for example. That was a cold-blooded murder. Yet, there was no, the jurisprudence of that case did not permit the death penalty. Even though we have countries like Nigeria, China, and the United States being retentionist countries that still practice death penalty, the point is that I'm totally against the death penalty for the reason that Akinola Aguda also proposed, that try to create the value for life to the extent that you do not at any point assume your responsibility or power to take another man's life.
I would agree with that. I live in a country where the death penalty is not allowed under any circumstances. But the Nigerian penal code, though, is pretty clear, isn't it? Once you kill, you get killed yourself for taking the life of another person.
It's barbaric and it's outdated, just like our Evidence Act has always been. Those laws you're referring to, the criminal code is 1945, or is the 1945 Act, while the Penal Code 1960 Act borrowed from Pakistan, for example. Whereas that was just like our Evidence Act used to be 1945 until it was amended in 2011. So we have just just being lazy as a country in terms of adapting to, this progressive development in the world. And we pay a huge price for that. And you see, by the time we now, you see issues of, gun control, gun ownership, will begin to come in terms of, okay, if we so value life in Nigeria, then give the individual, citizen, the right to own arms in order to preserve his own life. Those issues will come up if we truly take up these debates in the way it should be. We're not trying to lower standards here. We're trying to increase the standard of, respect for life.
And absolutely, I would agree with you there. Let me bring in Barrister Ejiofor there. How much does this discussion make people in Nigeria uncomfortable? Because it touches on some of Nigeria's fault lines, doesn't it? Including religious beliefs, for example, where there are injunctions that say that once you kill, you get killed as well. And some people just think, well, that's the law of God.
Well, that's the law of God, but you also know that when Christ came, he modified it because
but not everybody follows Christ in Nigeria.
In Sharia law, there are certain cases like adultery that permit for death sentence. So you have the fault lines like you have agreed. And if you begin to pursue it that we shouldn't have death sentences, some people will find fault in it to say, well, you are infringing on our own religion of Sharia.
Absolutely.
And if you push it further again on the Christian side, they will tell you that you should forgive your neighbor. You have no right to take life. But our constitution...
It's a fairly schizophrenic
exactly.
sort of
our constitution
line
guarantees
that people have to straddle.
right to life. But in that same constitution, you also see, except in the execution of a judgment of a court, can you take life of another person. So it's... but the general practice, like I said, is that the world is moving away from death sentence. In fact, I think 2003, October 10 was declared World Day Against Death Penalty, which is celebrated every year. So if we join the world to celebrate that day, why should we be drifting towards still death penalty?
Right, okay, we'll talk about this some more when we come back. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the death penalty in Nigeria following the sentencing of a woman to be hanged. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolo. Capital punishment is back on the agenda in Nigeria after an unofficial moratorium on executions that's lasted nearly 2 decades. Every year, dozens of people are handed the death penalty. The country has seen a huge spike in the number of death sentences passed, with many sentenced to hang or die by firing squad. At last count, there was huge public support for the death penalty, with about 65% of Nigerians favoring capital punishment. Correspondents say such sentiments are being boosted by feelings of insecurity across the country, with an insurgency raging in the northeast and kidnappings, ritual killings, armed robbery and communal clashes taking place across the country. But the latest case that sparked debate is that of Maryam Sanda, a woman who's been sentenced to be hanged after being convicted of killing her husband. The case has got the country talking about the merits and demerits of the death penalty and asking, is there a need to abrogate capital punishment in Nigeria?
It is the responsibility of the police as well as the agency of the state to ensure that this vengeance is being carried out. And that's what court did this afternoon. So we appreciate court for such a judgment and look at the space of time in which you carry out this prosecution. It was actually diligent and consistent. And I equally appreciate you members of the media for your consistency. Your little effort have actually helped in the due conclusion of this case.
And that's a prosecuting lawyer there in the case of Maryam Sanda, the woman who's just been condemned to death by hanging. With me in the studio, human rights lawyer and activist, Barrister Frank Tietie, and the lawyer and security analyst, Barrister Mike Ejiofor. Let me come to you, Barrister Tietie, because of course, your argument is that this aspect of Nigeria's constitution is outdated and is no longer consistent with global standards and international best practices. Is there any sense at all that Nigeria's parliament, the National Assembly, is considering amending the law to reflect this worldview?
Because of the kind of the nature of multilegal systems that we have in this country, that is federal, state, and possibly other agencies and other rule-making agencies that can actually make rules. It's difficult to actually carry on that legislation. But having served this country at the level of the United Nations, being a member of the Interministerial Committee on Human Rights, on the human rights situation in Nigeria, United Nations, I know for certain that the body language, the posture of the government, successive governments in the past, or past governments in Nigeria, and in this present one, is that they are against the death penalty. I can tell you for certain. What we have is that death penalty is popular in Nigeria because of the religious beliefs people attribute to it. But we're not a theocratic, state. We are a state that is governed by law. We're a republic, and so the laws are universal, irrespective of whatever you think. It's barbaric for to think of taking life as a system. However, you can take out life in order to protect the system and to protect other lives. You can't take life because I'm talking about the police, and then Mr. Ejiofor knows much about that.
Extrajudicial killing.
No, not extrajudicial killing. In course of law enforcement, for example, it is legal to take life because, for example, when a man that is holding a lethal weapon walks into a school to shoot children, you take the man out. That's legitimate, But as a system, presiding over a administration of criminal justice to apply the death penalty is what we're against. And then the idea that, you need to apply the death penalty because the religion demands that if you don't, you need to take an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, and if you don't kill the man that has taken the life of another man, there'll be a curse upon the land. I don't know how that relates to the current quagmire, economic quagmire, and the kind of bad governance we have that has taken life so much. I'm sure that's why Mr. Ejiofor, wants the China model of why, and we're against that too, because it's a situation where, for amorphous reasons, just like we've had in the case of...
Yes, they could be politically motivated. It could
but
be
in the case of Maryam Sanda, we need to get this. The bad thing about that case is that here we are, a woman, a wife, killing a husband. It's surprising that both the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense did not consider the medical evidence as to the mental state of that woman. And if you look at the judgment, where facts are adduced to the extent that the woman consistently said, "I will kill you, I'll kill you, I'll do that," and nobody ever thought that, was this woman well mentally? And to think, and I know Mr. Ejiofor understands this as a security man, to think that mental incapacity is a very potent defense against the offense of culpable homicide, and nobody mentioned it. And even when the prosecutor failed, and even the defense failed, the judge Somoto should have convinced himself, was this woman well?
We'll have to see what happens on appeal, but just to take up a point that you were making and to bring Barrister Mike Ejiofor in, he made a very interesting point about the religious aspect of this and why people are saying, well, an eye for an eye. But it's very interesting that it's only in the killing of a person that an eye for an eye, because if you steal somebody's thing, they don't steal from you.
Yes,
if you covet somebody's wife or something, they're not going to covet your wife.
That's not position of the law.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that, you know what I mean, that religious aspect of it doesn't actually fit.
It's strictly for...
Yeah, it's just for killings.
No, but let me draw this issue home. In Anambra, most of the southeast states, Delta and Edo states, they promulgated laws on kidnapping.
Yes, for the death penalty, basically.
Has it stopped kidnapping?
Well, they haven't actually carried out any executions.
No, but has it stopped? It has not stopped. Now, you see why I'm insisting on corruption. There was a case in I think it was Ondo or Ekiti State, if you recall, when some soldiers were sentenced to death for asking for arms. And the lawyer pursued that matter until it was committed. But you see generals diverting money, and they are taken to court. The highest they can get is 2 years, or even fine, or is a pat at the back. And Nigeria will continue to suffer because of corruption. Money meant for development, money meant for arms, money since 2015 that this present government, they've been investigating one case. on arms procurement. And who says it's not happening now? The same way they were investigating this matter. So the issue is that we should very, very hard on issues of corruption and matters like drug trafficking that affects the society. That's my position.
So do you think, Barrister Tietie, that he has a point? Because, I mean, if you talk about the scourge, I mean, what really affects this country in a detrimental, fundamentally detrimental way, and affects millions of people, and has literally devastated the economy of this country, destroyed its infrastructure, destroyed the hopes of so many people, and taken so many lives. Exactly. Because, I mean, hospitals and all that sort of thing are not working, largely because of corruption. Do you think there's a point in that as a deterrent, take out a few people and top them?
I don't agree. I think we are trying to use the death penalty as a negative elixir to all our problems. And I think I've always joined Femi Falana to accuse those who run government as being, to be lazy, to fail to apply principles of governance, that painstaking approach to solving problems. Here, a positive approach will be, let us value life above everything. Let us put a system in place where you don't have to have people stealing first before we go looking after them. So we have a very porous system, for example, where a governor presides over the resources of a state. He can actually virtually steal the entire state dry and nothing happens. Well, that shouldn't happen in the first place. Now, we cannot have a culture that encourages bad governance, that encourages irresponsibility, and then we now come and say, let us further terrorize the psyche of the people by applying death penalties.
Well, but I suspect a lot of people would support that.
So everybody would be afraid. No, it's for that cheapening life, and that's what we're against. But if we really value life, this is what we'll do. We will ensure that there is value for all the money is budgeted. All the hospitals are working, the emergency services are working, and then security and law enforcement are working. Everything is working.
Yeah, but the way you're going to make it work is by enforcing the law.
The way you're going to make it work is to learn how to make it work and do it. For goodness sake, those who sit in the federal secretariat, for example, we're supposed to manage a bureaucracy that enables government to work, that enables government services to be delivered to the people. It is not by threatening them that if you don't do it, or if you
but that's the whole point of having laws and rules and regulations and law enforcement. If you do something, there's a penalty.
There is a prescriptive aspect of law.
Right, I understand that.
Law is not always it's not always
Unfortunately, Barrister Tietie, we've run out of time. But Frank Tietie and, of course, Barrister Mike Ejio for fascinating discussion. I want to thank both of you very much indeed. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.